Yeah, I think my story is unique. Probably everybody thinks that. And where it becomes an issue is when people are like, "Hey, Sean, how do I get into Microsoft?" So I get this question from university students a lot.
Right.
And my answer, unfortunately, was, you know what? I really don't know. I kind of came in through like a side door, through like shipping and receiving. So what ended up happening is, during the dot-com, boom in 2000, I got a job at this interesting building called a data center. I'd never heard of a data center before. And as I was being toured through the data center, this was owned by AboveNet, by the way,
Okay.
AboveNet, and they had five colos or six colos, and one of them was leased by Microsoft. Microsoft was moving into this colo, and my job was to be a site service technician.
Mm,
But then the dot-com bubble burst, and that was the only colo that was leased in this data center. Above ended up going bankrupt, and so my job as a technician, I was like the Maytag man. There was no work. Microsoft had their own technicians,
right.
and I got into Microsoft because I couldn't take the boredom anymore. I went and I knocked on I went and knocked on the Microsoft Colo door,
Uh-huh.
and the door cracked open, and I said, "Hey, I've been in here for a few months. There's no tickets to work. Is there anything I can do for you? Hey, it's free. I'm not going to charge you. I'll sweep your floor, whatever. I'm just bored." And they were so excited. They said, "Come on in, go, go install our servers and our network gear and cable them up, and we can just sit here inside the fishbowl and stay warm and do the
Right.
configuration. And if you could just go out there and do all that work." Um, so that led to eventually Microsoft bought the data center, and that led to me then becoming part of the Microsoft data center team. But through that a bankruptcy experience,
Mm,
I got the amazing privilege to work on both sides of the house. So you know all about this. In a data center, you got two main teams, the team that works on the servers and the IT gear, and then you got the team that works on the generators and the chillers.
mhm.
And they don't really hang out too much, different discipline and all that kind of stuff. But to the uninitiated, I explain this a lot. Like you got these two groups, right? And they're both
Mhm.
critical. And through the bankruptcy period, the subcontractor that was doing that work walked out.
Mm,
And so a couple of us had some mechanical electrical training, me from the Navy and then another guy from the Marines Motor Corps. And we had this amazing kind of 6 month experience where we'd come in, we'd go configure a router, we'd go change a bearing on, a crack unit, we'd go, install some SCSI cables, we'd go adjust the temperatures or check the oil in the generator. And it was so cool because we really got to understand the ecosystem of the data center and how everything changes. For example, one day I got a ticket saying some servers were overheating. Okay, so then I go over to this one corner and it was really, really cold. But for some reason, the servers at the top of the rack, were cold. So I could go in the back and I could adjust the temperatures and all that kind of stuff. And I could, the BAS system, building automation system, I could see where all the hot spots are. And I'm like, oh, that's funny. The temperature should be good in this area. Went and got the infrared, gun and saw that there was this very interesting stratification. Basic stuff. The servers on the close to the floor were cold. The servers on the top of the rack were hot. Set up some, this is before, hot aisle containment and all that kind of stuff was the thing. This was,
Yeah.
way back in the day.
I'm tracking with you.
But it was just such an amazing experience because I got to just kind of learn how everything across the ecosystem worked and how they impacted each other. And yeah, I'm so thankful for that experience.
Mm,
And what it ended up doing is it set me up really well when Microsoft decided, you know what, it's time for us to start building our own data centers in
mm,
about 2005. And so there was just a few of us that kind of had this context and this background on the full ecosystem. I think there was five of us that sort of initiated this team. I think there's 8,000 that do it now. But just having that context, allowed me to then roll right into the land site selection, the energy, the engineering and the design, the construction, and then at the very end, the integration, actually turning the thing on and stuff like that. So all of that became great context for what I do now, and that's to look into the future, see where the issues are, see where the opportunities are, and then try to apply new technology or new ways of doing that, and being able to communicate with all the different teams, both inside and outside of the company, to make those a reality. So it's been so much fun. I can't believe 25 years have gone by. It's been like that.
That cross-functional training, and I'm wondering, was that your nature before you joined the military? I got to believe in the Navy that helped facilitate, or at least an opportunity to, how do I guess what I'm saying is I meet so many people from the Navy that spend some time, if they're curious, look it to the left and look it to the right. How is that informed before your philosophy before you got to Microsoft?
Okay, I appreciate that question because it's something that I learned about life that of course I use today, and I try to explain it to others when people will listen. One of the best things that I learned in the Navy was to not be afraid to learn other disciplines. Today, if you're a mechanical engineer, don't be afraid to learn the electrical side of the house. If you're an IT person, don't be afraid. That was one of the things, and it was it was first forced and also encouraged. So it sounds like you had kind of a similar experience, but when I joined the Navy submarine fleet, there's only so many people they can pack on these boats.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really important for you to learn a variety of different jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And, like what happens if something happens to, 2 or 3 people that are expert in sonar, they might need someone to sort of step in and things of that nature. So that was an enormous amount of fun. I got to learn navigation and sonar and torpedo technology and, just all kinds of really cool stuff. There's a diesel generator on a nuclear sub. Not a lot of people know that. There's a standby diesel generator on the submarine. I'm telling you, these submarines are kind of mini data centers.
Yeah.
Except data centers don't move around. Data centers even have GPS antennas. You know this, but a lot of people don't know that, right? So the other part of learning other disciplines came from a little tip that I got from an old salt when I was brand new. He said, "Hey, listen, new people have to spend a lot of time on what's called the mess decks, peeling potatoes and getting rid of, trash. It's a dirty job. It's a long job. It's 12 hours on, 12 hours off. You're always dirty. It sucks."
Right.
He's like, here's a pro tip on how you will minimize the amount of time that you're picked to be, we called it cranking, to be cranking. He said, be useful. So what happens is before the ship goes out to sea, the chief of the boat, who's in charge of making sure he's got enough people qualified to do all the jobs, he's always going to be short on one of the jobs, right? And so before you go out, you say, "Hey, chief, what are you short on?" And then you go get with those people and you get qualified that job, whether it be sonar technician or battery charge electrician or whatever it is.
Right.
And I was able to do my whole using this pro tip. Wish I could find this person. I owe him so much. Right. Before I would go out, I would do that. I did exactly what he said. And I got to learn all these different jobs throughout the boat. And it made me too valuable to put on the mess decks. So much so that I was able to go my entire tour and never crank, which if you talk to another submarine person, enlisted submarine person, they might be upset to hear that. But this little pro tip, and taking that into, Microsoft and stuff like that, you have to stay useful, right? You got to look around, whether it be you're worried about layoffs or you're worried about advancing your career. You always got to be looking around and being in putting yourself in a position where you're going to have the most impact.
Right.
This also came from my parents. My dad was a contractor, blue collar guy, And if he wasn't out there, he was a roofer, but if he didn't learn siding or, this or that, the other thing, work could dry up for him and the money wasn't coming in. So I think the best thing that I learned from my parents, the Navy, is just to constantly be looking and be willing to then shift and learn and step outside your comfort zone and learn things that maybe you wouldn't identify with. And through that process, it's just been so much fun because I wouldn't have had the chance to learn these other things and find out that I actually really enjoy it. Right. Imagine if I said, no, I'm an electrical engineer. I don't deal with valves or whatever. You'd be missing out on a huge, portion of this rich world that we live in.
Peace Corps, the military, whatever. Just go do something where you're serving other people and you learn these things.
Yeah.
I'm convinced it just serves you better in life, whether it's data centers or whatever you want to go do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. That's great. I'm super glad that I got to do it. My plan was never to stay in. And about 3 years into it, I got hurt. I got sick and I got hurt, and I was actually released a year early. And so while it was not part of my plan, you got to be ready to roll with things. I had this plan going into them. Here's another pro tip: if you are thinking about going to the military, don't just show up and say, "Take me off to some foreign land," but I got to have a plan.
Right.
Even if the plan changed. So in my case, I had a plan.
Right.
It's going to be 4 years, get out. I was going to have some engineering, education, to training that could be applied to the degree. I could use my GI Bill, finish the degree, and then I got cut off short. So plans change, but at least go in with a plan, right? And then there's a saying, as you know, in the military, all battle plans change the minute the first boot hits the dirt, right?
That's right. When you were, so you're there, you come knocking on the door and say, "Hey, free labor." Like, what was there? I obviously they said, "Come on," but what was that like? Were they, what was the reaction?
They were so excited to have someone do the grunt work. So excited to have somebody go out in the freezing cold colo, back when we kept them, cold.
Yeah.
And, be unboxing servers and cutting their hands inside the case, configuring the dip switches and putting in the RAM and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Things are obviously different now. Wrestling, these RAID arrays, all these SCSI cables, all the cabling in the back and the cabling in the back of the server is a very important part of the whole cooling system. You got to keep these cabling bundles tight or it blocks the airflow, right? So it takes there's some art to it.
Yeah.
And they were just so excited to have somebody do all that grunt work. I was excited because I was working on, Microsoft was buying the cutting edge technology. I was working on $1 million routers and stuff like that. And I was so excited about that. And everyone was just so happy to teach me, because the more they would teach me, then the less work they'd have to do.
Right.
And that was the relationship and arrangement, that I had with the service techs in there is, the more I'll teach Sean, the more work that he'll do for me. And those IT technicians work extremely hard. So you might open the door and see him play in Guitar Hero.
Oh, yeah.
But what you probably don't see are those high price tickets that come in and people working, multiple days and up very, very late. I remember there was a one of these viruses, were hitting and we had to deploy a bunch of servers, Windows Update servers, to get the patch out, get the fix out. Yeah. And these people, were working, 16, 17-hour shifts and coming in, on their days off. Everyone cared about their work. Yeah. And so, they you might catch them playing sometimes, but when the shit hit the fan, they were all over it and they were extremely professional. And I loved seeing that. It's like, we care about, this isn't just about making sure a company's, hitting their bottom line. Right. It's about making sure these systems work for everybody in the world. And that care was just, like I said, it made you feel like you were a part of something bigger than just, helping a corporation make profit.
One of the things about the gig that you've got now, whether it's Microsoft or some of these other really influential hyperscale customers, you guys get to, like, you're in the middle of both the production side of things. You're leading software development. You're leading in design of data centers. You're leading in so many areas, energy, like, because you're having these conversations. And on the other side of that, you get to see a lot of the new ideas. Probably not a lot of them make the light of day. When you think about this, how do you imagine your role now as you get to influence everything from sustainability to operational excellence and safety through the technologies we're considering? How do you think about that today?
Yeah, absolutely. First, let's start with sustainability.
Okay.
It's more than just a good idea. If you're not building data centers in a sustainable way, you won't be able to sustain building your data centers. And we're seeing that today, right? A lot of areas are running out of energy. The lead times are long, right? And so to think about applying sustainability, not only do you get, good sort of environmental benefits out of it, you get good business benefits out of it as well. So if we could wave our magic innovation wand and have a standby generator that produced zero emissions, okay, well, that's not only good for the environment, but it's good for business as well. You're able to deploy your data centers without being held back with diesel generator permits and things of that nature. So I try to think of sustainability as sort of like the full stack, the full spectrum. And most of the time, David, what benefits the environment actually does benefit the business as well, whether it be sustainable concrete. We've been doing a lot of work with, biogenic concrete, being able to create concrete with cement that's derived from organisms. Look, it creates another supply chain for concrete, and it makes those core building materials much more available. So yeah, right across the board, my experience is whatever seemed to make sense from a sustainable environmental standpoint seems to be working from a business standpoint also. I can give a variety of different examples of that. But what we see with this new workload, this new AI workload, is it's kind of the old problem, but it's it's extremely accelerated. And this is actually a lot of fun because it's creating new and novel problems that we're having to solve in new ways. It's just a ton of fun, So one of the things that I'm seeing is that while in the past data centers could sort of be this autonomous load on the grid, those days are gone. Now the data center industry is getting extremely well integrated with the energy industry, and we now have this. We're moving towards a system where the data center load and the generating and the transformers, the whole energy system is now working together. It's the only way to make this work. There was a study by Duke University that came out last week, and a lot of us kind of knew everything that was in there, but it offered some interesting factoids. One of them was there's no shortage of power in the U.S. There's at least 100 to 200 gigawatts available if your load can be flexible. Well, every data center comes equipped with a generator. Every data center comes equipped with batteries. And so being able to then switch and then have a data center that has this flexible feature, it's not a very hugely disruptive, feature to add to the data center. And I've done a bunch. I've done a bunch of these data centers that have flexible features to them, and it's doable, right? There's a steep learning curve, but this is so much fun. This is a we probably 5 years ago we were trying to really tune the efficiency. Now we're trying to tune these for the scale and the size. Brand new problems. It requires new tech. So this new problem where we need to have data centers that are flexible is driving technology advancements. It means, look, we need better than diesel. We need better than lithium ion. We need better than, air-cooled transformers. We need better than busway. And so it's driving all of these ideas that might have stayed in a university lab for the next, 2 or 3 decades. And now we're like, what can we get in 5 years? How can we collapse that, lithium ion, by the way, that took 7 decades from the lab to where we are now, where it's competitive with lithium ion or lead acid, 7 decades. And now our industry, data center industry, is like, well, we don't have 7 decades.
Right.
Let's see how we can work together with universities, with people that want to fund this stuff, private equity, private capital. Let's work with governments. Let's work with suppliers. And let's see if we can collapse that down to something less than 1 decade, because we need it now.
Yeah. I want to come back to something, if you could help us understand what you mean by flexible. But before you do that, I remember an interview I did years ago with Don Sadoway from MIT, and he was talking about liquid metal batteries. But regardless of the technology,
right, yeah.
Yes. So, but one of his conversation with me and in his TED Talk and other stuff is, look, when we focus on this, we'll solve it. Whatever it looks like, he had an idea that he really liked, but whatever the final outcome was, we'll solve it, but we really got to do it. But one of the things that it seemed to me, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it seemed like what he would get frustrated with, and I think a lot of researchers, innovators are, let's not have pretense. Let's not call something, hey, we have all of this available energy generation over here if it's intermittent and you don't have real grid level storage. And that grid level storage has to be safe, has to be affordable, has to be reasonably local. To ship it from another part of the country or the world, we're defeating the purpose. And if it's too expensive and it's unsafe, so how do we do these things? And we're not attacking any particular, solar or whatever. All we're saying is, yes, we'd love to use that, but we got to put these things together with the technology that we have today. Let's invest in innovation, and we'll be able to innovate through some of these things. Other stuff will get abandoned. New stuff that we're not thinking about will get adopted. But at least let's just be honest and let's pursue it with an open mind. Can we use different fuel sources for diesel? Can we use, some of this? Even me, when somebody's telling me this the other day, I was like, oh my gosh, that sounds crazy. And they start walking through numbers. I didn't fact check them, but they start walking through if we think about this like this, here's what the possible outcomes would be. And I was almost embarrassed for myself, Sean, because I was like, oh man, I immediately, instead of saying, tell me more, I was like, that can't work. We know that can't work. Why not? Well, because I got a bias that that I'm holding on to, instead of saying, well, I'll give you a few minutes, help change my mind. I already have a certain perspective. And so if you can't change my mind, well, then we're not going to move forward. But let me at least be open-minded enough that you could present the idea and we can evaluate it. That's not easy to do.
It's not easy to do at all. I know. I think it's just the way our brains are wired. We're looking for this, extreme solution either way, left or right, or, 1 or 100. And then when you finally get to that mature state, I think when you look behind you, you realize the answer was somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Actually somewhere in the middle. And so, to your point about being open-minded, being able to realize that what I see the answer is, and those people are wrong, they're probably right on a few merits. And so we're probably going to end up in the middle. And so I need to be thinking about that now.
Yeah.
I tell you, I am never more thankful when somebody is able to show me that I'm being wrong about something. Like, that's how you become my best friend overnight, is if I'm going the wrong way and I'm hyper fixated on some solution, and you're like, oh, hey, actually, X, Y, and Z, and you're able to then bring me back to be on course. I've had a number of people in my career that I trusted that did that for me, and I will always be in their debt.
Yeah, because that's the difference between being kind and nice. Kind is, even if it's painful and you don't understand, because I'm contradicting a thing that you believe to be true, but I love you and I want to, and if I can't, if I'm wrong, like just because somebody asserts something doesn't necessarily mean it's true. But I've had that experience in my life, and so you're right. We're fortunate. We're both fortunate where we have people, whether it's in our personal or professional life, say, look, I'm willing to risk. I'm not saying being a jerk about it, but I need to insert here, and hopefully in a private way, in a way that we can understand, so that it gives you the best opportunity to reevaluate. I'd much rather you be kind to me and I avoid a catastrophe or money or pain or have to do rework than nice, because it's messy and you figure I'll get there anyway. But the only thing we can't replace is our time. And the second place is our health, and third is our relationships. So help me fix those. And that's how do you manage that? I know that you're just saying that's happened with you. How do you maintain a culture of that where you're at? Because that's it's not easy to do, especially at the speed and scale that we're talking about.
Well, it's a critical question. What I've seen is, people sort of base their identity in the solution that they're working on. If you're in a university and you are working on a new type of solid oxide fuel cell, a lot of people then base their identity in that technological solution. This isn't just a technology thing. This spans across politics and parenting and all this stuff. Is just the way we're wired. But I think understanding that's the way we're wired, then you can make steps to make sure that you don't trip yourself up. So in the case of the researcher or the engineer who everything they look at, they see a solid oxide fuel cell as the solution, then being able to, step aside and say, no, that's not your identity. You're an expert in, physics or chemistry or whatever it is. And listen, when the facts change, we change our minds. And that's what's going to help us be successful in the long run, not just in the short run. And you know what? It's not easy, right? There's a certain level of vulnerability to be, to have something in the side of your brain that's like, I might be wrong about this. I might be going down the wrong path. I think how you temper that though is, I want to be successful in the long run. I don't want to just hold on to this thing, it be the wrong thing, and then continue to keep, fighting this, for decades, just to find out at the end that I'm wrong. Because there's so many examples of that in history, right?
Yeah.
Of people that just would not let something go. And we don't want to be that person.
Yeah.
I think having somebody that you trust is important, that are going to be able to deliver it in the right spirit. Okay, I love you. I want you to be successful. I see you going down the wrong path. Hey, here's some facts, here's some figures that that takes a lot of trust. But then I think you also need to always be ready to find out that you've got it wrong. And as a matter of fact, if you start realizing that you haven't had that I'm wrong moment in a while, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
Right. We all make mistakes, and that's part of the learning process. So it's just, it's so important to just be ready to let go of that favorite tech, that favorite thing that you're working on. And a lot of times it's not just writing it off. It's making tweaks. It's making, pivots on something. Maybe it's not a solid oxide fuel cell. Maybe it's a proton exchange membrane fuel cell, right? So getting over the vulnerability is hard. But if you can, I think that's what separates successful people.
So when you're evaluating some of this technology, and you got the reality of physics and discovery today, so you got a balance of, I've got to move forward to deliver something to the marketplace, and I want to innovate and make sure I'm doing it in a wise way. What are the technologies that you're thinking about? I mean, not all of them, but one or two or three that have your most attention right now.
Yeah. They're going to be cooling and energy technologies. And, cooling, I think, is pretty straightforward. What we see with cooling is it's kind of, reciprocal. Our industry goes from, liquid cooling to air cooling to distributed to, more centralized, so we're going back and we're relearning how to do liquid cooling, but liquid cooling was a thing, 2-3 decades ago. So we're sort of relearning that, taking all those best practices forward. On the energy side, it's really different, right? So on the energy side, the old solutions definitely do not work. Today, if I own an energy company and I want to stand up new capacity, the cheapest form of new energy capacity is wind and solar.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that doesn't bolt up very well to a data center,
Right.
obviously, right? The wind dies, the sun goes down. And so there's something in between that needs to happen. And that thing that's in between, that, so an energy person would say, I need some way to firm up my renewables. So
Yeah.
the wind dies and the sun goes down. I need something that uncover that. And it could be a natural gas generator, it could be a battery, it could be a hydrogen fuel cell. There's all these different options. What a data center person, when they look at that, they're like, okay, well, I need some sort of standby generation.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're talking different taxonomy, but we're talking about the same thing. Matter of fact, that was one of the most fun parts about my job is then learning, as I'm sort of translating between different industries, learning they're
Right.
talking about the same thing, they're just using different words. Long duration energy storage. The energy industry would love this to firm renewables. We would love it because then we could just put batteries at data centers and not generators, right?
Right.
It is not an insignificant issue.
Right.
The energy industry needs batteries that can store energy for, days and weeks on end, in some case months. On the data center side, we need something that'll store energy for a couple of days,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a week. But
Mm-hmm.
then there's these corner cases where the utility could be out for a few weeks, and you don't want to sit there and watch your batteries die, and then your data center is going. You want some way to be able to, if you've got diesel generators, hey, at least you can call up the diesel trucks and fill things up.
Right.
Although I think that's kind of a myth, but we'll
Yeah.
talk about that here in a minute. The things that I'm most excited about are energy storage and clean generation. I'm also excited. So that's outside the data center. And there's a number of different new technologies. And I'm working with, like I said, universities, national labs, governments to try to accelerate the commercialization and the scale up. Because if I can't get it at gigawatt scale, it's useless to me. But then the other part is what's going on inside the data center. The densities are getting extremely high.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to be able to then tweak our data center design so that it can be built fast, it's sustainable, but it's also safe.
Right.
Right. And we need to be thinking about that right now. If I'm going to pack 4,000 amps inside of a rack, I need to be able to figure out how to do that safely.
Right.
This isn't this is an issue that if we don't take seriously, it's going to come back to bite us in the future. So there's a number of different technologies that are sort of in the lab being prototyped that allow you to get all of that energy in such a small space very, very safely as well. So I want to see that type of stuff get accelerated. I'm really excited about solid state transformers. If we can just get nerdy here for a second.
Please.
Let's just get, if you think about it, most of that gigawatt load in a large, campus, all those components run on DC power.
Right.
And so, and there's a liability with distributing AC throughout the data center, all these fault currents and things of that nature. And so if there was a more elegant way, if we could sort of rethink how we distribute energy in a data center, that'd be interesting. There's another technology that's called redox flow batteries. And the energy industry has been kind of experimenting with it. There's some large deployments of it. I think there's some really unique advantages a data center can use inside of the data center fence with this type of technology. I'm working on a project right now. Stay tuned. We'll be releasing some more details about it later. But these are, like I said, these are technologies that we probably wouldn't have thought of even considered using if it weren't for these new novel problems of density and the size of the campus.
I haven't read the Duke report. I've made a note here. I'm going to go check it out.
Yeah.
But I'm curious. There's a lot of talk in the world today about on-site generation. So if we go to generation for a moment, whether it's the grid, public grid, whatever, or on-site, Is that part of your evaluation? Do I want to see on-site happen? Would I rather just see it's tied up to the public utility? Do you guys consider any of that?
Yeah. To a data center person, there's standby generation and there's on-site generation, right?
Right.
No, those are two separate things.
Yeah.
To a utility person, those are technically the same thing.
Right.
And one of the most fun project I worked on that was really counterintuitive at the time, but it made a lot of. Remember, we were talking about it, go where the logic is pointing you. The logic was pointing us here. The logic was pointing us at installing very expensive natural gas generators, not diesel. So, I mean, the CapEx is higher on a natural gas generator. Why would you ever do something like that? Oh, it saves you money in the long run. All right. So to a utility person, that makes a lot of sense. But to data center people, that takes a lot of PowerPoints and a lot of meetings to explain how does this work? And what had happened is, we had Microsoft had just hired this not a data center expert, but an energy expert, Brian Janis. And, he comes and he looks at everything that we're working with and he's like, you guys have distributed generation assets. He's like, you guys can use those things. And so he goes to the utility and he's like, hey, you guys have to build a new power plant to power our data center. Well, our data centers have on-site generation. Let's just build one set of on-site generation. And we were able to negotiate this really cool deal where the utility looks at the data center as if it's one of their generating assets.
Wow.
And everybody won. And, the environment won. There was not another power plant being built. The ratepayers won because, the utilities expenses didn't go up. Microsoft won because we were able to get capacity faster and lower cost. Everybody won. So I think when we look into the future, I don't see a lot of projects where you have a dedicated power plant. There's going to be some corner cases here and there. There's probably going to be some bridging solutions where you have to have a generator there for 6 months, a year, 2 years until the utility infrastructure is being built. But what I see is data centers dispatching generators and batteries more often in the future. And as a matter of fact, it's happening today. Utilities are saying, hey, we'll give you your capacity faster. We'll give your capacity at lower cost. If you just, for a few hours of a year, when I need to power all of these heaters in the middle of winter, you just take your load off. I can serve my customers. I don't have to build more generation. It's win-win for everybody. So that's where it's going to be. And there's a number of solutions a data center can tap into. And I think data centers are going to be tapping into all of them. Number one, we have control of our load.
Right. We
can sort of throttle CPUs. We can transfer load, although I think that's only going to be practical for very limited periods of time. Sort of like these quick responses. We have batteries that we can dispatch. In Dublin, you can read about this, but in Dublin, we gave the utility partial control of the UPSs. And the utility, EirGrid in Ireland, uses our data center batteries to regulate the frequency and keep the frequency very, very firm. So just by doing that, we're able to help everybody. We're keeping the grid more stable by integrating the data center in with the utility. In the past, the data center was just kind of a load, it's kind of a liability on the grid. Where we're at right now is we're transitioning into a system where the data center is one of the assets on the grid.
And is that when you were saying earlier about a flexible design, that's what you mean, that ability to absorb, a percent or two, a few percent, few dozen hours. I'll absorb that. But the benefit is out of, all of these thousands of hours, if I absorb a few of these, it firms up the grid really. Like we can manage everything else. You take those, and we can now exponentially, like a force multiplier, get more out of the infrastructure that we've built.
That's absolutely right. A 1 gigawatt data center campus has a gigawatt of energy storage and a gigawatt of generation capacity. It's just how data centers are configured. And if you are able to then integrate that with the broader energy network, you get all of these really cool benefits, economic benefits, sustainability benefits, all across the board.
So how do you recruit or bring people in and keep that esprit de corps we've talked about a number of times, just in your own world? How do you find both the talent and the emotional ability to be vulnerable, to participate? How do you manage that?
Okay, I love this question because this is such a great opportunity that I think companies are just now starting to tap into. When you're bringing somebody in, this person might have different training than you, might have different experiences, all this kind of stuff. And one of the first things that you can do with new people is you get a fresh set of eyes on whatever it is we're working on. So that's the very first thing I tell new people. I say, hey, listen, if there's anything that you see that doesn't make sense, don't keep it to yourself. There's a chance that we're blind to it. And so if you see something that doesn't make sense, or maybe you see something that's obviously solvable, that some industries already solved, do not keep it to yourself. That's the very, very first thing. This is, I think, what companies are trying to get to with diversity is not just people that look different, but people that think different also. Because if, like I said, if somebody can, come from a different industry and they've solved very similar problems, but it wasn't a data center, it was a foundry or a refinery or something like that.
Grocery store.
Yeah, I want to know that right away. The other thing that I tell new people is get your butt into a data center. Do whatever you have to do, bribe, beg, steal, whatever you need to do to spend a couple of weeks gutting it out, doing all the hard work inside of a data center, because you're going to have context that's limited to very small amount of people in this world. And I don't care if you're going to be working on data center finance or data center network or data center construction. Having that operational experience in that context is going to be able to inform everything that you do. We have to be fast adopters of new technology, whether it be the latest fiber optic connector, server, whatever it is, that is built into our DNA. We have shrugged off any fear of using new stuff, right? And that is an extremely important strength. And I think that as we learn the energy side and we start integrating data centers more with the grid and start learning that kind of stuff, I think our industry is going to be the early adopters of clean energy technology that then is going to, allow that to become ubiquitous in the rest of the world, where, there's going to be this sort of like this benefit. This is where I'm at, is utilizing our industry to really benefit the rest of the world with accelerating the adoption of new clean energy technologies.
Yeah. You've said this before from the stage. I loved it. I had in my notes, I was chuckling when I found it. And you said there's you see failure as a gift. Like there's a real role of failure, which is not to say we want to be constantly failing, but just what you're talking about there in innovation or early adoption, like we have to be safe. We understand where we're trying to go. And so we're willing to do in a control situation, experiment or whatever. But what did you mean by that failure as a gift in that context?
Oh man, if you we saw this in the rocket industry. The most glaring example that I love going to is look where we're at with the cost of launch. How is the cost of launch, the cost of getting things into space, so cheap right now? It's because a company decided they were okay with things exploding on the launch field.
Right.
And it's a gift in that it allows you to get really smart, really, really fast in a controlled way, of course. And I think a lot of other industries are deathly afraid of failure. And I think our industry we try things out, and if it doesn't make sense, great, we'll pivot. There's a whole list of technologies that that our
Right.
industry has tried, and we're like, that doesn't make any sense. It's a gift in that it allows you to learn. It humbles you. It allows you to be much more open in the future that, hey, I might be wrong. We were talking about that earlier. It gives you appreciation of whatever you're working on. There's this apocryphal story in Intel. I'm not even sure. I hope it's true. Where Intel was working on this brand new chip, and this person had it on a cart, and the platter was on a cart, and they're moving it, and something happened, and this one of a kind prototype platter fell, and it broke, and it was a disaster, and it set everybody back. And apparently the CEO is sitting there learning about it, and their people are like, okay, so obviously this person's fired, and they're never going to step foot in another foundry, and the CEO is like, no, wait, that is the most valuable employee that I have right now. No one else understands how critical it is to be careful with these things. I love that story. And I think it's true. Of course, listen, if you make the same mistakes over and over and over again, you're just being careless.
Right.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about having the courage to try new things, the wisdom to be able to try them in a way that it's not going to create, to fail small, and the humility to say, yeah, I might get this wrong. And if I do, I'm going to learn from it, and I'm going to try it again. And I think what a lot of very successful people will tell you is you don't go from nothing to success. You go from nothing to fail, and then you hit a success.
Yeah.
And so, that's what I try to teach that with my kids. Look, you just try it. If it doesn't work, no problem.
Right.
I've got a 20-year-old, and he thought he wanted to be radiology tech. And so he tried it, and he got a job, and he hated it. And now he's studying computer science, and he may hate that too. And I'm like, just try it. It's in a controlled, limited way. Anyway, I can't preach more that managers need to be open and embrace employees that are trying things, that are making mistakes. Those are going to be your rock stars someday.
Yeah. And again, kind of tying it back to where we started, start with the plan. Iterate on your plan as you go. This is the wrong path, or, I should have walked through the data center this way, or whatever. And we're not encouraging people, hey, don't have a fear of failure and just run out and start touching energized things out on the floor. But it is, look, in a logical manner, as you test your hypotheses, iterate on them. And it may be that we abandon the whole thing, or it may be that it moves on to something that is spectacularly valuable. So we're coming up out of time. I'm curious, with all of this going on in the role that you're playing there, one of the most important organizations in our space anyway that has a lot of influence, it's really helping to drive innovation. What is it that keeps you up at night? I know that's a cliche question, but I'm curious, what is it that you're like, this, we need to continue to be successful here? And maybe not Microsoft, maybe that's a wrong way to think of it, but just as an innovator and a leader in our industry, what are the things that you're thinking about mostly?
Yeah, the thing that worries me most is that I'm not cognizant of my blind spots. It takes a long time to develop and commercialize tech, and if you spend all that time on the wrong, forget the money for a second. The waste of money would be terrible, but the waste of time is actually more valuable. And so, what I don't want to learn, 5 years from now, hey, 5 years ago, I should have been working on this other thing. It's like baking a cake. Technology takes time. There's nothing you can do, to get it overnight. And if you're not working on the right thing, then, you're wasting your time where you could have been working on something else. And so, how do I combat that? I don't care if it's a subject that I understand at an expert level. I'm always reading more about it. I'm always just trying to double check and learn new things. So I think it's probably the blind spot. I think the other thing is, what's next? Okay, so everyone is so focused on delivering AI data centers. I would hate to have something like quantum data centers sneak up and us not be ready.
Mm.
Right. And so I do spend time, trying to think about what's going to be after this. At one point it was cloud,
Mhm.
and now it's AI. What's it going to be after that? And what are some things that I can do right now to invest in future, Sean? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, Sean, we've talked a lot. What haven't we talked about that wouldn't start a whole new podcast that we should have talked about? Or is this a good spot for us to wrap it up today?
I think this is a good wrap. Yeah, let's come back, next year and see what we got right and what we got wrong.
I don't know if I can wait a whole year, but I can't wait till our next conversation. Thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, have a great day. The honor was mine.
Thank you. Hey, look, if you guys liked that conversation, hit the like button. If you loved it, hit the subscribe. We'll see you next time, everybody.
That like button.
Smash
Elbow
it.
drop that like button. John Cena, that like button.
In a Christ-like way. We'll see you next time, everybody. Have a good one.